Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor to rise in the debate on the speech from the throne so many months from when the speech from the throne was delivered. I want to make sure that I begin by letting the chair know that I will be splitting my time with the honorable member from Kitchener Centre. And what a pleasure it is to work with him in the House. I know he's there in person. I wish I could be soon, I hope. The speech from the throne, Mr. Speaker, of course, landed, and I was in the House for the day of the speech from the throne back November 23rd. And the Governor General, and I do think it's a wonderful thing that our Governor General delivered a speech for the first time, a speech from the throne delivered not only in our two official languages, but also in Inuktitut. I had the great honor of knowing Her Excellency from many of her previous incarnations, including we once served on a board together at the International Institute for Sustainable Development. I think she'll be a fantastic Governor General, and I was very pleased to be here in Ottawa to hear her speech from the throne. But as she noted at that time, November 23rd, we were still in the throes of the devastating events that had hit British Columbia. The honorable member for Abbotsford was just speaking of it. The devastation of the flooding and the landslides, the Fraser Valley, including into my own riding of Saanich Gulf Islands. But the most devastating and catastrophic impacts were clearly more in Abbotsford and up through the Fraser Valley. And of course, the loss of every major land route within Canada, every route to reach the Lower Mainland was cut off by these extreme weather events. When the speech from the throne was delivered, we were only 10 days from the end of COP26, the global climate negotiations, which were not a dismal failure, but certainly failed to succeed. The COP26 did not do what was required in this desperately pressing moment. So when I read the speech from the throne again now, as 2 months have passed, I am struck by how the words are wonderful, but the actions promised are inadequate to meet the spirit behind the words. I'm struck by it, Mr. Speaker, that and I will address several elements of this, and my other colleague from the Green Party from Kitchener Centre will address other critical issues we're very concerned about. I want to address the reconciliation theme within the speech from the throne, the vaccination questions, and of course, the climate crisis. In no area have the promised actions lived up to the really quite strong words that speak to multiple crises that face us. Let's start with the challenge of reconciliation. Many members in this place have quite appropriately mentioned that we're still in the throes of the discovery of the missing children taken forcibly from their homes, taken away from their families over a period of more than 150 years and forced into situations that were unimaginably horrible for those little children, many of whom did not return home. We have to face this. We have to continue to support First Nations communities in a national program that was required of us by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission years ago, that we would, in fact, find what happened to every single Indigenous child taken from their home who didn't return. Find what happened and how did they die and where are they? To every family, a report. That continues to be a priority. In the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls inquiry, we were told very clearly many things must be done to protect Indigenous women who are at greater risk of being murdered. We haven't done those things. One ties in very closely to the climate crisis and to many other aspects of things this modern industrialized country fails to do well, and that's ground transportation. The Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls inquiry said they're more vulnerable. People are more vulnerable when you're low income and there's no public transit from where you live. You have your choices are basically hitchhiking. It's not a choice. We need to restore via rail and restore bus service across this country. We also need to make sure that the settlement that was announced earlier in January between the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society and the wonderful, heroic Cindy Blackstock be real and be made real and stay on top of that. We applaud the $40 billion set aside, but as Cindy Blackstock has said, it needs to be monitored closely to really deliver. On international vaccines, I want to just again raise, as I have in the House before, we understand now from this pandemic that we do not end it. We know what comes after Omicron. Someone mentioned what comes after Omicron. Pi. That's the next letter in the greaser out. That's the next variant we're going to get. And until we vaccinate everyone on the planet and make this place as our home, as a human family, stop being a living petri dish to see how many new variants we can get by vaccinating around the world, Canada has avoided and not answered the question, will we support South Africa and India in asking for an exemption from the patent protection of the World Trade Organization? Under the Trade-Related Intellectual Property Rights TRIPS, we can get an exemption so that vaccines are more available around the world. Turning to climate, Mr. Speaker, you'd think that a person in the Green Party couldn't be unhappy with a speech from the throne that says our Earth is in danger, that says this is the moment for bolder climate action. Again, great words. But in the pages devoted to talking about the climate crisis, there is no mention of what our Paris commitment is, that we hold global average temperature as far below 2 degrees as possible and attempt to hold to 1.5 degrees Celsius. These numbers in themselves, I think people's eyes glaze over, or they doesn't feel like a real number, 1.5 degrees Celsius. It sounds small. I want to remind members that in this last year, where over 600, well, nearly 600 British Columbians died, according to the science, in the heat dome in 4 days. 4 days. My own stepdaughter nearly died. She's in her early 30s. She nearly died because the temperature in Ashcroft hit 50 degrees Celsius. These are killer extreme weather events. And 600 people in British Columbia in 4 days. This is an extreme event. And that same day that the temperature kept going higher and higher in Lytton, and the town center virtually burnt to the ground in minutes. They didn't get the fire truck out of the fire station. That town, by the way, has still not been helped to still not be rebuilt. We know that the wildfires spread over hundreds of thousands of hectares of British Columbia. We had, and then of course in the November, atmospheric rivers that knocked out so much of our infrastructure and killed people again, and killed thousands of livestock, hundreds of thousands of animals. The heat dome, by the way, in late June and early July, was estimated to have killed 1 billion sea creatures along our shorelines. These events happened at 1.1 degree global average temperature increase above what it was before the Industrial Revolution. 1.1 degree. 1.5 is not some safe place that only dreamers can hope we hold to. 1.5 is where we need to be to hope human civilization hangs on. We are on track after COP26 to be much closer to 3 degrees than 1.5. And Canada's target remains the weakest in the industrialized world. And we seem to have substituted what we need to do, what we must do to ensure our children have a livable world, 1.5 to stay alive, with net zero by 2050, which creates the false impression that getting to net zero by 2050 holds to 1.5. It doesn't. It only holds to 1.5 if the pathway to net zero by 2050 goes through 2030 with emission cuts that look like this. They go down dramatically. They must go down. And Canada's target of a range of 40 to 45 degrees cut, that 40 to 45% cut rather, is completely inadequate to meet the global demands on us to pull our fair share of the weight to reduce emissions to hold to a livable planet. There's likewise in the speech from the throne no mention of banning the export of thermal coal, no mention of the Just Transition Act, no mention of the right to a healthy environment, nor of bringing back the Canadian Environmental Protection Act amendments that were Bill C-28 and died on the order paper when the unnecessary election was called. Mr. Speaker, in the 30 seconds that remain to me, I just want to say to all members in this place, I can't vote for a speech from the throne for all of its wonderful words if my grandchildren's future isn't protected. We have to say it loudly. We have to be honest. We have to be clear. Maybe we have to say, just look up. We don't have much time. And we must ensure that this government do heroic action to save this planet and all humanity.
Question et commentaire, questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Winnipeg North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd be interested in the members' thoughts with respect to the Greener Homes program, which is an initiative where residents in her community and mine throughout Canada can actually apply for a grant of up to $5,000 to make their homes more energy efficient. One would ultimately argue it's good for the environment, it's good for job creation and improving our housing stock. Just her thoughts on that specific program, if she doesn't mind to share her thoughts.
The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Highlands.
I thank the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. I cheered for that program when it was first announced by Stéphane Dion, the former Environment Minister, 2005. The former Finance Minister, Ralph Goodale, had it in his budget. It's great. It's great to see it back. It's great to see it expanded to include such things as putting on solar panels, but it's far too small. We really need to be restoring housing stock and municipal, institutional, and commercial buildings as well. Every building in this country needs a retrofit, and it needs it as fast as possible. So the program needs to be expanded dramatically.
Question et commentaire. The Honourable Member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for her speech and for her continued passion on climate change. One of the things I've noticed, though, is that...
Je m'en appelle au règlement. Monsieur...
Point of order. Rivière-des-Mille, MP, the member for Rivière-des-Mille, please. With all due respect, Mr. Speaker, I feel that there is currently unfairness between the right to speak for members in the House and members who are present virtually. It's not just about me and the many times that I've raised my hand, and it's not just today. I don't know if we're in your blind spot, but I hope that we can reestablish more fairness to ensure that we can all speak. We would all like to be there in person, of course, but ultimately, this is benefiting parties that have many more members there in person. Thank you very much for the point of order. I do see you, and I do my best to apply the rules to all members, whether online or here in person. And I do my best to represent all political parties here in the House. And sometimes Bloc Québécois members here in person rise as well. You will be the next on the list if we have time.
For Sarnia-Lambton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I was saying, I thank the member for her speech and her passion, and she's calling for us to accelerate our efforts to address climate change. But I would say that this government has not even met their existing 2030 targets. They're not on track. I don't know how many of the billion trees they've started to plant, but it doesn't seem like there's anything but rhetoric coming from the other side. Would the member agree?
The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Highlands.
Thanks to my colleague from Sarnia-Lambton. This is a tough one. I can't agree that the government has done nothing. They are putting in place programs and measures that at least should get the direction right. I mean, we often say, and this is true, that the government of Canada, regardless of which political party is in power, has never hit a target it set. But it's worse than that. They've never gotten the direction right. So far, no matter how many commitments are made to reduce emissions, they continue to go up. So I think we're going to begin to see emissions coming down, but that's not nearly good enough because the measure of our success isn't whether we fooled enough people to win another election. The measure of the success is whether we've met what the science demands of us to hold within a carbon budget. The window is rapidly closing on holding on to a livable world, and that's why I will give them credit for doing something, but I can't claim they're doing nearly enough.
Commentaire, l'honorable député des Rivières-des-Mille.
The honourable member for Rivière-des-Mille. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Moving on, it's always a pleasure to hear the member from the Green Party about climate challenges and other issues, because her speech was mainly on that, of course, but I understand how aware and intelligent she is about this topic, and I'd like to hear what she has to say about health transfers that all the provinces are asking for from in this country, so that we can receive 35%. So it's at the heart of what's at stake right now. Of course, there's the environment, and there's also the health as well. Thank you. The honourable member for Sandwich Gulf Islands.
Oui, monsieur.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague from the bloc. That is a question with very generous and kind comments. But I think we also have to talk about the threat to our health because of climate change. I've already mentioned heat waves, people who have died because of climate change. I believe with the bloc, in terms of the government and the provinces having to collaborate more so that they can protect our public health system. And that is why, with the pandemic, our healthcare system provincially have been under great stress. And it's now a growing crisis.
On continue le débat.